The night my family threw me out, they didn't hand me a suitcase out of love. They handed it to me so the neighbors would think I was leaving on my own. I was 20 years old, 5 months pregnant, and standing in the rain outside the only home I'd ever known. I didn't know that the man who was supposed to stand beside me that night, the father of my child, hadn't abandoned me at all. He'd been taken from me. And 3 years later, he would come back looking for us, in a convoy of black SUVs long enough to shut down the entire street. My name is Amara Diallo, and until I was 20, I was the responsible one. Top of my class. Never a scandal. My mother used to introduce me to church friends as the daughter who does everything right. That title didn't survive the day I found out I was pregnant. His name was Malik Osei. We'd been together for a year, quiet about it because his family was old money and mine wasn't. Then one week he just stopped answering. No calls. No texts. His number disconnected. I told myself he'd come back and explain everything. He never got the chance to. When I finally worked up the courage to tell my parents, I thought, foolishly, that they would be angry, but that they would still be mine. I was wrong. My father didn't yell. That was the worst part. He just looked at me the way you look at something broken you're about to throw away. "You've embarrassed this family," he said. "Pack your things." My mother stood behind him and said nothing. Not one word in my defense. My little sister, Sasha, stood at the top of the stairs with her phone raised, recording. Sasha was 17, the golden child, the one who never had to try. I found out later she'd posted that video with a caption, "When your sister ruins the family name." It got shared for weeks. They gave me one suitcase. I packed it with shaking hands while my mother watched the clock like she was timing me. On my way out, I turned around one last time, hoping, praying someone would say stay. Nobody did. That was my 20th birthday. I had $80, one suitcase, and a baby growing inside me with nowhere to grow up. The first week, I slept in the waiting hall of an old bus terminal on the edge of town, the kind of place with broken benches and flickering lights that nobody bothered to fix. I learned to sleep sitting upright, arms wrapped around my stomach, because lying down on that cold tile felt like giving up. I remember being hungry in a way I'd never experienced, not I skipped lunch hungry, but the kind that makes your hands shake and your mind foggy. I remember counting coins for a single piece of bread and crying in the bathroom of a gas station because I was too proud to beg and too scared not to. People walked past me every day. Some looked at my belly and then looked away, like pregnancy without a ring was something contagious. A security guard at the terminal used to let me stay past closing because, in his words, "You remind me of my daughter." His name was Mr. Boating. He never gave me money, but some nights he'd leave a sandwich on the bench beside me and pretend he forgot it there. I told my unborn baby out loud every night, "I don't know how, but I'm going to give you a life. I promise you that." I didn't believe it yet, but I said it anyway. Everything changed the morning I walked into a small cafe called Corinne's Kitchen, looking for a bathroom, not a job. The owner, a heavy-set woman with reading glasses always pushed up on her head, was scrubbing down the counter when she saw me standing in the doorway, swaying on my feet. "When did you last eat?" she asked. Not, "Can I help you?" Not, "We're not hiring." Just, "When did you last eat?" I lied and said that morning. She knew I was lying. She sat me down anyway and put a plate of food in front of me before I could argue. Her name was Corinne, but everyone called her Auntie Corinne. She'd buried a husband and raised 3 kids alone, and something about me, she told me later, reminded her of herself at 22, standing in a doorway with nothing. She offered me a job washing dishes in the back. $3 an hour, off the books, but with it came something I hadn't had in weeks, a reason to get up in the morning, and someone who looked at me like I still mattered. I worked 12-hour shifts on swollen feet. I saved every dollar in an old tin can under the cot Auntie Corinne let me sleep on in her storage room. I wasn't just working for rent anymore. I was building a floor under my child before he even took his first breath. Labor came 3 weeks early on a Tuesday night while I was still wiping down tables at the cafe. I remember the pain doubling me over near the register and Auntie Corinne shouting for someone to call an ambulance, and the terrifying ride to the hospital where I had no husband to hold my hand, No mother to smooth my hair back. No family in the waiting room at all. I had a nurse. Her name was Halima, and she never once made me feel like the girl having a baby alone was something to pity. She held my hand through every contraction. She told me I was strong when I didn't feel strong at all. When they placed my son on my chest for the first time, red-faced, furious, alive, Nurse Halima was the one crying almost as hard as I was. I named him Kofi. I looked down at that tiny face and made the same promise I'd been whispering for months, except now it wasn't to my belly. It was to a real, breathing person who was depending on me completely. I don't care what it costs me. You will never feel unwanted the way I did. The next 3 years were the hardest and proudest of my life. I kept working at the cafe, Kofi bundled in a carrier on my back while I bussed tables until Auntie Corinne insisted I start selling something of my own on the side. I began buying gently used clothes from donation bins, washing and mending them by hand, and reselling them at the weekend market for a small profit. It started as a folding table and a hand-painted sign. Within a year, it was a proper stall. Within 2, I had a small shop, Second Chance Boutique, 3 blocks from the cafe that gave me my start. I want to be honest, it wasn't a fairy tale. There were nights I cried from exhaustion. There were months I skipped meals so Kofi could have new shoes. There was a landlord who tried to raise my rent the week I signed the lease, betting a young single mother wouldn't fight back. I fought back anyway, but slowly, piece by piece, I built something that was entirely mine. Nobody had handed it to me. Nobody could take it away. Kofi grew up calling Auntie Corinne Grandma Corinne. He never once asked why he didn't have grandparents of his own. I always wondered how I'd explain it to him when he got old enough to ask. I never got the chance to plan that conversation, because everything came rushing back at once. 3 years after that rainy night, I found out, through a cousin who still spoke to me, that my sister Sasha was getting engaged. The cousin sent me photos from the party without meaning any harm. Balloons. A banner with Sasha's name in gold letters. My mother, glowing, giving a toast. And then the cousin told me what my mother had said in that toast, word for word, because she thought I deserved to know. Sasha has never brought shame to this family. Unlike some of my children, she has always made the right choices. Some of my children. Not my other daughter. Not even my name. I had been reduced to an example of what not to be, spoken about at my own sister's engagement party, like a cautionary tale. I sat in my small apartment that night, Kofi asleep in the next room, and I let myself feel it, really feel it for the first time in years. Not just anger. Grief. I had built an entire life from nothing, and to them, I was still just the disgrace who left in the rain. I told myself I was done trying to earn back people who never valued me in the first place. I didn't know that 48 hours later, a black SUV would idle outside my shop, and the driver's door would open to reveal the one face I never expected to see again. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was folding sweaters at the front counter of Second Chance Boutique when I heard it before I saw it. The low rumble of engines, more than one, pulling up outside like a small motorcade had lost its way and ended up on my quiet street. 4 black SUVs. Then a 5th. I remember thinking, absurdly, that some politician must be visiting the bakery next door. Then the rear door of the lead vehicle opened, and a man stepped out in a tailored charcoal suit, and my whole body went cold before my mind caught up. It was Malik. Older, broader in the shoulders. But it was him. The same eyes that used to look at me across a crowded classroom like I was the only person in the room. He didn't walk toward me like a man showing off. He walked like a man who had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times and was still terrified he'd gotten it wrong. Amara. That was all he said at first. My name like it still belonged to him a little. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to slam the door in his face for every night I'd spent hungry and alone while he was, wherever he'd been. Instead, my legs wouldn't move. He told me everything, right there on the sidewalk, in a voice that kept breaking. His father, Elder Osei, had found out about us and about the pregnancy, and rather than accept a daughter-in-law from a family with no money and no name, he had shipped Malik off to run the company's overseas office within days, cutting off his phone, intercepting his letters, telling him I had already left the city with someone else. Malik hadn't abandoned me. He'd been erased from my life by someone with enough money to make it look like a choice. It had taken him 3 years, his father's death, and a private investigator to find me. 3 years of believing I hated him, and me believing he'd simply thrown me away. I have a company now, he said quietly. Osei Holdings. None of it means anything if I can't fix what I broke. Then his eyes moved past me, toward the back of the shop, where a small boy with his exact eyes was peeking around a rack of children's clothes. Is that? His name is Kofi, I said. He's 3. Malik didn't ask permission. He knelt down right there on the sidewalk, at eye level with a son he'd never met, and I watched a grown man, a man who arrived in a convoy of luxury SUVs, break down crying in front of my shop window. Malik didn't ask me to forgive him that day, and I respected him more for it. What he asked instead was permission to meet Kofi properly and slowly, carefully, to be part of his life, no matter what I decided about the two of us. 2 weeks later, still unsure what I felt, I agreed to something I never expected. I let him drive Kofi and me to my parents' house.
I didn't do it for them.
I did it because Kofi deserved to know where he came from, even the ugly parts, and because some small, stubborn part of me needed them to see who I had become, not out of spite, but so the little girl inside me who'd stood in the rain with a suitcase could finally exhale. My mother opened the door and went pale. My father stood behind her, and for the first time in my life, he looked small. They saw Kofi holding my hand. They saw Malik behind us, the man whose name they now recognized from business headlines, standing there not as a stranger, but as a father claiming his son. My mother's mouth opened and closed twice before anything came out. Amara, You don't have to say anything, I told her, and I meant it. Not out of cruelty. I simply didn't need her approval anymore. I'd already survived without it. Sasha appeared in the hallway, the same phone in her hand that had once recorded my humiliation. This time, she lowered it without being asked. I didn't come for an apology. I came so Kofi could see his mother stand in that doorway, without shaking. People love a good revenge story. I know that's often what you're expecting when a video title says a man returns in a convoy. Believe me, there were nights I fantasized about exactly that kind of ending. But real healing looked different than I imagined. Malik and I took things slowly for Kofi's sake, and for my own. He didn't buy his way back into my life. He earned a place in it, one visit at a time, one broken promise repaired at a time. What we have now is quieter than a fairy tale, and steadier than anything either of us had at 20. With his support, and with everything Annie Corinne and Nurse Halima had already taught me about showing up for people with nothing, I opened something bigger than Second Chance Boutique. I called it the Kofi Center, named for the reason I never gave up. It's a shelter and job training program for young mothers who've been thrown out by their families, exactly the way I was. We teach tailoring, we teach small business skills, and most importantly, we give them a bed and a hot meal on the nights when the whole world has made them feel like a mistake. My parents never got a grand punishment. They didn't need one. Watching their daughter become someone thousands of strangers now call Auntie Amara was consequence enough. If you're watching this tonight because someone made you feel like a disgrace for a life you didn't choose, a pregnancy, a mistake, a circumstance out of your control, I want you to hear this clearly. Rejection is not a verdict on your worth. It's just a door closing on people who were never going to walk through it with you anyway. I was thrown out with one suitcase and a broken heart. Today, I run a business, a shelter, and I'm raising a son who will never once doubt that he was wanted. They said I was their disgrace. I became someone else's proof that starting over is possible. If this story moved you, subscribe for more real stories of women who were counted out and came back stronger. And if you've ever felt like Amara did that night in the rain, tell me in the comments. You are not alone.